called The Pilgrim Spirit that has been modernized a tiny bit. So, I am Plymouth Rock. I saw the pilgrims fleeing religious oppression come to the brave new world and land upon me, right here. 100 years, no, 300 years after the pilgrims landed in Plymouth, the wonderful Sir Arthur Lord referred to me as the sacred boulder of Plymouth, Massachusetts, and of the United States. I have seen freedom. I have seen a new life different from the way of Great Britain and free of being a colony. I am Plymouth Rock. So, the thing is that monologue, what I based my monologue on, is from a play called The Pilgrim Spirit, written in 1920-ish. And it has the Plymouth Rock as not only a character and the narrator, but he meets not only George Washington, but also Abraham Lincoln. And I feel as though the glorification of Plymouth Rock, which is seen here in this beautiful illustration, as well as in its gorgeous temple that it resides in on the coast of Plymouth Bay, really reflects how the United States thinks of our history and what we think of as the American story, which is really a single story. If you look further into the beautiful temple of Plymouth Rock, the sacred boulder, you will see a lowly rock, maybe the size of this table, covered in pennies because tourists throw them. And you will see, this is actually very blurry, I'm sorry, but you'll see a bunch of very disappointed Midwestern tourists and a lot of very disappointed Europeans looking down at the rock and saying, is that it? So it's very underwhelming, but we hold it very dear, not only in Massachusetts, but in the United States. And actually, 1 million tourists go and visit and get disappointed by Plymouth Rock every single year, which is a wonderful piece of information. James and Patricia Scott Dietz of Archaeology Magazine said that Plymouth Rock is more of a myth than substance. It has been here, it has been moved around Plymouth, it has lost. It's estimated it's about 1/3 the size it used to be, which is still not that impressive boulder-wise, but it really represents this myth of the Pilgrim Fathers, which is very prevalent in not only Massachusetts but also the United States, of the idea of the Pilgrims were fleeing from religious oppression and they came to what is now the United States, and they said, hey, there's nobody here, or in some telling, oh, there are only very peaceful Native Americans here who are very happy that we have joined them, and we're going to thrive and eventually make our own country. And that is simply not the case. This is the original Victorian temple of Plymouth Rock, and very closely tied with Plymouth Rock itself, the idea of, hey, they showed up and they were free from religious oppression. The Pilgrims, or what we believe is left of the Pilgrims, because they were buried on a hill, so it rained and all the bones fell out of the hill. The bones were up at the top structure here, right above and looking over Plymouth Rock. And it's very closely knit with the history of colonization. And we think of Plymouth as the home of the first Thanksgiving. And you look at illustrations of the first Thanksgiving, I forgot to include it, but you look at an illustration of the first Thanksgiving, and there are like 50 Pilgrims and maybe 10 Native Americans, and that's not true at all. The chief of the Wampanoag tribe brought a full army with him when he went to the first Thanksgiving because he did not trust the Pilgrims, and rightfully so, because of reasons such as King Philip's War, which we learn about. We don't learn about it in elementary school. We learn about the fun buckle hats and the fun little construction paper feathers. We don't learn about the scalping and the heads on pikes that the Pilgrims were responsible for. We don't learn about the original seal of Massachusetts, which depicts a Native American standing there and saying, come here and help us, which is the most racist thing I've ever seen. This was the seal of Massachusetts until the 1950s. which is terrifying. People's grandparents, possibly even your parents, were alive during the 1950s. Also present in Massachusetts and as well as the rest of the United States were these concepts of praying towns and Indian schools where they were like, hey, we're going to convert Native Americans from their culture, we're going to assimilate them into the white society. And it was an act of violence and an act of colonial violence. And in the United States is not the only nation in North America free, or not free from this. Canada is not free from this, is what I meant to say, because Canada had schools, Indian schools, up until the mid-1900s. And oppression is still occurring today, and the concept of a single story is still occurring today, with even colleges and college level focusing on just Western history, colonial history, European history, not really focusing on Indigenous history at all. And oppression is still happening today. I'm not sure how caught up you guys are in the news, but in North Dakota, 3 days ago now, North Dakota decided to vote, you must have an address, and a P.O. box is not suitable for an address. But the problem is on reservations, you don't get an address, you just get a P.O. box. So suddenly, massive groups of Native Americans are unable to vote in the midterm elections, which are less than a month away, I believe. So Plymouth Rock, the beautiful structure that I can't pull back up again because it's in the past now, but the beautiful concept of Plymouth Rock and the beautiful concept of the Pilgrims showed up and everyone was friends and everyone got along swimmingly is just simply not true. And the fact that the United States is really focused on this concept of the American history and the founding fathers and all this is showing that we only respect a single story. And we have to step back and reevaluate why we only respect the single story and how we can start respecting other stories as well. Cool.